Bible alludes to, but then there's also a lot of things that haven't happened yet that the Bible alludes to. So as we go through Daniel chapter 2, and remember, we're in the part right now where Daniel is going to give the content of Nebuchadnezzar's dream along with the interpretation. And in this dream and in this interpretation, we're going to see Daniel prophesy about the future. But because this was 2,000 plus years ago, some of what he's already prophesied in the future has already happened for us. Does this make sense? But there's also some that has not happened, even though it's been 2,000 plus years. Really, really interesting stuff. And so as we read this, as we read the prophecy and we read the things to come, and looking for Jesus' return, it's nothing to really scare us. It's not to make us fearful, because God has not given us a spirit of fear, right? It's not to make us dive so deep and to be so curious when it comes to prophecy that we're so hyper-focused on it that we think, every single sign that ever happens, like the stinking eclipse that just happened, right? It's like, okay, Jesus is coming back now. It's going to be April 8th, 2024. Do you know every time that's happened, like the whole Mayan thing, the whole Y2K, whatever it is, it's like, that's when he's coming back. And it's like, no, that's not it, right? It's just all these guesses, and you can be so consumed by it. And I think, and I believe that the Bible doesn't give us a day or a time, not so that we search out for what it is and try to figure it out and do all these calculations, but just so that we live day by day. It's no different than God's will. He wants us to live day by day trusting in Him. So He wants us to live day by day just expecting Him to return, like anticipating, hoping, right? And living with that hope. And so when we read these prophecies, again, it's not to scare us. I think it's just to make us, encouraged that God's in control. No matter what goes on in this world. Because listen, if we had lived through the past 2,500 years, we would be like, oh my gosh, God, you better come back quick, right? And I know we think that now too, but some of these empires that rose and fell and all the wickedness that happened, it's a lot, right? It's a lot. But we focus on God being in control, even though man is wicked, and even though all these earthly kingdoms are established. And we're going to get through this as we study through chapter 2. So let's jump into verse 31. Because last week we ended in verse 30. And now we get to the literal part where Daniel is going to give the content of the dream. Remember, because that was what Nebuchadnezzar said. He says, I need you not just to give me the interpretation, what you think it means, but I also need you to tell me what actually I saw in my dream. So here it goes. Daniel chapter 2, verse 31. He says, You, O king, you are watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, and its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So let me just say this really quick. Let me explain it in about 1 minute, and then we'll break it down more in depth. This image is standing before Nebuchadnezzar, correct? This is how Daniel describes it. The point of that is that God is showing Nebuchadnezzar that these are all the things that are going to happen in the future because it's standing before Nebuchadnezzar. So here's this great image, right? And it's broken up into four, kind of like four sections, but number 4 is kind of like 4A and 4B, right? So you've got the top section of the statue, the image. It's the head, and it's made of what material? Gold, okay? Then you've got, I think it's the arms and the belly, the chest is what? It's made of what material? Silver, okay? And then what was it? The legs, they were made of iron. What? Bronze. Think of the Olympics, right? Gold, silver, bronze. I meant belly and thighs is the bronze. Then it's legs, right? You get to the legs part, and that's made of what material? Iron. And then you get to the feet, and it's still iron, but it's mixed with, thank you, clay, right? So you've got these, let's look at them in 4 sections. Each section represents an earthly kingdom, okay? And I will explain in a little bit which kingdom is which, because the Bible will interpret it for us and tell us which kingdom it is. So you're going to have to look at Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 to really figure out what these kingdoms are. And these kingdoms have already come and gone, right? So the very first one is gold, and obviously it goes from gold, silver, bronze, iron, and then iron mixed with clay. So it goes from like the most expensive and nicest material to something lesser, and then the least, correct? Then, as we read here in verse 34, he says, you watched while a stone was cut out without hands. What do you think that alludes to? Where else in Scripture is that described? Like the cornerstone, right? The chief cornerstone. Do you remember Jesus talking about the chief cornerstone? That is the stone, it's a stumbling block of offense that if you don't believe the truth of God's word, it's offensive and it will crush you. But if you do believe in it, it will save you. Right? And so this chief cornerstone is always a representation of Jesus. So now this stone, which is cut without hands, what is the only thing that was never created without hands? What's the only thing that was never created? How about let's start there? God, right? It's something that it's alluding to God and his kingdom. Something that was never cut out with man's hands. So it's an allusion to God, but specifically his kingdom. God's kingdom is not built by men. It's built by God. So this kingdom that God is going to establish, we see that it's represented by this stone, right? And it says that it strikes, in verse 34, the image of its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. He says, then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed together. They became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. What does that imply with the earthly kingdoms that have been established throughout the years? That in the end, in comparison to God's kingdom that he's going to establish, they mean absolutely nothing. Even though how great and grand and spectacular and how powerful they were, they're nothing in comparison to God in his kingdom. And again, this is not a fear tactic. I believe this is part caution, but it's part hope. And it's especially hope for those who have put their faith in Jesus Christ and knowing that our King has a kingdom that he's going to establish that is righteous, that is pure, that is just, because all these earthly kingdoms that we see from, like 600 BC to now, they're wicked and they're evil. Right? They're wicked and they're evil. I mean, wouldn't you say that most governments are? Most kingdoms are? And why is that? Because they're run by sinful men. Right? Now, is God still in control and does God ordain certain people? Of course, he does. But again, it's run by, and the kingdom that we're to submit to is not one run by sin, but glory and power, as we see there in verse 37. So, in verse 36, he says, this is the dream, and now we will tell the interpretation of it before the kingdom. He says, you, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of the men dwell, or the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. So let's start there. You are this head of gold, but after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, right? Because silver is inferior to gold. Then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And then the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong, but also partly fragile. And you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay. They will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom, right? This is in reference to the stone, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. And you know what's really cool as I'm going to break this down? You're going to realize that even though this was written before all these things transpired, they ended up transpiring. Remember how I tell you all the time that the prophecies that we studied, the prophecies of the Old Testament, how 100% of them have come true to the point of like this time that we live in. There's still some that haven't been fulfilled, but all of them that have been told up to this point have come to fruition. And these are some of them, these kingdoms. And you can ask your history teacher, did this happen? Did that happen? And it did. And then you'll see that it coincides exactly with Nebuchadnezzar's dream and Daniel's interpretation. And you'd be like, whoa, God knew this all along. God knew what would transpire over the next 2,500 years plus. So let's go back to verse 31. Give me water. Again, he says, you, O king, were watching. Behold, a great image. And this great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. The image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, and belly and thighs of bronze. So just, again, the value in metals decreases from top to bottom. Its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. So Daniel sees this amazing, extraordinary splendor. This large, awesome statue. Again, it stands before King Nebuchadnezzar, implying that the vision pertained to future events in their time, right? And it's going to, as we're going to see, it's going to refer to this panoramic sweep all the way from Nebuchadnezzar at this time to Jesus' second coming, right? Jesus already come once, correct? You guys believe that? He was born as a little baby, right, in a little manger. Virgin Mary and his adopted father, stepfather, I don't know what you call it, Joseph, right? Jesus was here. He lived 33 years, died on the cross for us, he rose again, but he's coming back, right? He came the first time as a humble servant. He's going to come a second time as what? If he's going to establish a kingdom, what do you think he's going to come back as? A king. You guys are smart. He's going to come back as a conquering king. That's what he's going to do. And God is allowing all this time to transpire. Why? Because he is long-suffering and he wishes that no man would perish. Meaning that he's giving men and mankind time after time, chance after chance to turn to him. That's what he desires, right? He doesn't want anyone to be crushed and to be perished. That's not his heart's desire. But if that's what you choose, then God allows, because it goes against his nature. So again, this is referring to Nebuchadnezzar's time all the way to the second coming of Jesus. And this entire statue is a representation of man's dominion or man's kingdom, right? And whose dominion, this world, whose dominion is it right now? Satan's, right? God, well, really it's man. Man was given dominion over, animals and this world, but then he gave Satan leeway. He gave Satan some power in this world, and so mankind has just followed in that wickedness, and we see it from kingdom to kingdom to kingdom, and all of man's glory and pride and selfishness. But all these empires, all these kingdoms, they will rise to some fantastic, great glory, right? Nothing, no kingdom, no earthly kingdom will ever be like Nebuchadnezzar's, right? It's a representation of gold. It's on the top. It's the head. It's the best kingdom, earthly kingdom, that has ever reigned. And when I say best, I'm saying it from a man's point of view. How powerful and how splendor it was. And specifically when it came to the king of that kingdom, nobody ever had as much power on earth as Nebuchadnezzar had. Not even now when it comes to any president or king, not even the president of the United States has had as much power and authority that Nebuchadnezzar had in his time. And so all these kingdoms are going to rise, but what's going to happen to every kingdom too? They're going to fall. They're going to fall. And we saw this in Greece. We saw it firsthand. All the things that we experienced, all the wonderful, beautiful architect and everything, but a lot of them were kingdoms. And do you know what we were looking at? Rubble. Why? Because at some point, and you can read all the details about it, and how it was like it was thriving and it was good, it was strong, it was healthy, and then here we are looking at it 2,000 years later, and there's weeds growing out of the bottom of it, and it's desolate, it's broken. We go and see the Acropolis, and we're looking at half of it, right? Because half of it's destroyed. Most everything is destroyed. Because kingdoms rise, earthly kingdoms rise, but they also fall. And we see this. We see it in history. We even see it now as we look at things in life. And so then we're going to see that there's an important distinction between the legs and the feet. Remember, the legs, they were pure iron, but the feet were not only iron, they were also clay. And so the whole statue, the whole image is very top-heavy. It's very top-heavy. And we're going to see the significance of that when we look at the interpretation. So verse 34, he says, "Look, Nebuchadnezzar, you watched while a stone was cut out without hands." "Which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." One thing I want to encourage you with as we study through Daniel is that if you look at really any prophecy, it's always good back to, in whatever book you're in, it's always good to go back to Daniel, because Daniel is kind of the foundation, especially the chronological order of prophecy. Okay? Now, prophecy, I don't know, for the lack of a better way of definition of it, it's oftentimes something that is going to happen in the future. You can look at it in the sense of like predicting the future. It's not really that. It's not like a prediction. It's this is what's going to happen, right? And especially when it came to the prophets and the judges of the Old Testament, their prophecy was such as, Israel, God has told me to tell you that if you continue in this way, this is what's going to happen. It was usually one of two circumstances. If you repent and you turn to Him, there's going to be blessings and yada, yada, yada. But if you continue in your sin, there's going to be consequences, right? And that's where Israel is right now. This is why Daniel's in this position that he's in right now in Babylon, because Israel was in sin and Israel was not repentant. So he gave them over to the Babylonian Empire. That's why Nebuchadnezzar took them over, and he took Daniel in, and he trained him and all these things. But even in the midst of Israel's consequence and their lows and their valleys, God still uses it for their good, right? Daniel's in this position because of that. So even the bad stuff God uses for His good and His glory. And so, again, all prophecy, all biblical chronology is found within Daniel, and it's something that we need to look at in Daniel. So we're in chapter 2. But it's also chapter 7 that's going to give us an idea of these kingdoms, these four kingdoms, and the important roles that they play in world history. In Daniel 2, as we read this, it's going to present these kingdoms from a Gentile perspective. So from our perspective, right, I'm sure a majority of us are Gentile, meaning that you're not Jewish, of Jewish descent. But if you look at Daniel chapter 7, it's going to present the same exact thing, but not from a Gentile perspective, but from God's perspective. Okay? And that's why when we see the kingdoms in Daniel 7, the same kingdoms, they're going to be represented as beasts. Okay? And we'll get to that when we get to Daniel chapter 7. So Nebuchadnezzar, he's looking at the statue. There's a stone that's cut out without hands. It strikes the statue, but it strikes it at its weakest part, which is the feet that's mixed with iron and clay, not just the iron alone. And that's important because we're going to get to that when it comes to the interpretation. But he says it's going to become like chaff. Do you guys know what chaff is? It's not like chafing. You guys know what it is, right? It's when you're winnowing wheat, the way that they would do it is they would first crush the grain, and then they would toss it up in the air. And there was a different, not buoyancy, but different weight to the grain and the stuff that didn't matter, right? The little flaky stuff, the stuff that's not edible, that you don't eat. Guys, shh. And so what they would do is they would throw it in the air. And guess what would happen? The wind would take the chaff, the stuff that was useless, that wasn't good for anything, blow it away. And then the stuff that was good, the grain, do you think it would be blown away or it would just fall down? Just fall down, right? Because it's heavy. It's heavier. And so that was an easy way to separate the chaff from the grain. And so we're seeing here that what's going to happen is this destruction, this stone hitting it and crushing it into pieces. It's going to be like chaff, and it's going to blow these things away. And again, the thing that's blown away are the worthless things, the things that have no use. And so he's pointing out that these kingdoms are going to be blown away. They're going to be crushed into pieces or like powder, and the whole statue is going to be blown away to the point that there's going to be no trace of it, right? No trace of it. Because we see that in verse 35. It says, the chaff from the summer threshing floors, the wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. Now there's traces of the kingdoms that we've seen in the past, right? We saw some Roman, I don't even know what you call them. There was some Roman stuff that we saw from the past, and some Greek stuff, and some other stuff that I had no idea what it was. But the point is temples and bathhouses and hotels, I guess what they call it, I don't know. And the point is there's a remnants of it still. But Jesus is no, when I come to establish my kingdom, there's no remnants of man's kingdom anymore. None of it. There's no trace of it going to be left. And so that's what he's getting at. So let's break down these four different kingdoms. The first one is obviously which one? Because Daniel says it to Nebuchadnezzar. He says, you are what part of the statue? Gold, right? And like I told you, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, Babylon, was the greatest earthly kingdom to have ever existed when it came to power. And Nebuchadnezzar himself, because he was the king of that kingdom, was the greatest king to have ever existed in regards to power. No one could, it was just insane. That's the best way to describe it. So the very first kingdom is Babylon, right? Babylon is represented by the head of gold, which you see in Daniel chapter 2, verse 32, but also in Daniel chapter 7, remember, from God's perspective, God's point of view, like a lion having wings of an eagle. That's in Daniel chapter 7, verse 4. And Babylon reigned from 612 BC to 539 BC. So it was the greatest earthly kingdom, but it also wasn't established that long. It eventually fell. And it fell to the next kingdom in line, which is the silver part of the statue. Anybody guess what kingdom that was? It was the Medo-Persia, right? So when Babylon fell in 539 BC, that is when Medo-Persia took over. And it's represented by the upper body of the silver. And also in Daniel chapter 7, again, from God's perspective, it's represented by the bear, right? We're talking about beasts from God's perspective. Very similar to when you read Revelation. Then we get into the third one. So Medo-Persia reigns from 539 BC to 331 BC. Then the next kingdom, and this is all history, guys. This happened. The next kingdom that came after Medo-Persia, which is represented by the belly and the thighs made of bronze. Anyone want to guess? Greece. Good job, guys. Yeah, Greece. So from 331 BC to 63 BC is when Greece reigned. They were the reigning kingdom of the world. So they're represented again by the belly and the thighs made of bronze, but again, it's also found in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 6 from God's perspective. They are the leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. Then, the last kingdom, which overtakes Greece and is represented from 63 BC all the way to AD 476. But it still has a representation now in the time that we live in. Anyone know what kingdom that was? Rome. Right? Rome. Remember who was Israel subject to in Jesus' time? In their reign and rule? Rome and the Romans. So Rome is represented again by the legs of iron. And then in Daniel chapter 7, it's represented by the unspecified beast, which has iron teeth and bronze claws. But then you get into like that extension of the 4th kingdom, right? The final phase is described as the feet and the toes mixed with iron and clay. And then in Daniel, it's represented by 10 horns or 10 kings. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So now as we jump into verses 36 through 45, I hope you guys are following with me. I'm sorry, I know this might be boring, but it's actually very fascinating. Daniel now is going to explain the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. So we gave him the content, now here's the interpretation. He's going to point out that history would be dominated by these 4 powerful Gentile kingdoms that would rule the world until they were destroyed by the 5th and final kingdom, which is God's kingdom, right? And God's kingdom is going to involve the nation of Israel. Now, this period of time, right, all the way from the rise of Babylon in 612 BC to the very time of now and until Jesus comes back, this time is the domination of Gentiles, which is the illusion that Jesus makes in Luke chapter 21 when he calls it the times of the Gentiles. Right? So we are living in the times of the Gentiles until Jesus comes back. So let's look at the interpretation. Verse 36. He says, "This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king." I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar's literally has his jaw on the ground, shocked. I cannot believe that you literally told me word for word, visual by visual, what I saw in my dream. Because he didn't tell a soul. And so he is realizing at this moment that there is a God, and it's Daniel's God. Right? None of these other pagan gods, because they're not real, he knows now. He's shocked. So he says in verse 37, "You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory." So remember I said last week, and I've said it a lot today, is that he is the greatest of kings to have ever existed because of the power and the splendor that God has given him. He represents the gold. He's Babylon, right? And Daniel calls him what? The King of Kings. And you might be thinking, isn't that Jesus' title? Isn't he the King of Kings? And he is. But if you look, this is a lowercase king, lowercase k in the beginning, right? So representing that Nebuchadnezzar is the best or the greatest, most authoritative, most powerful earthly king over other earthly kings. But then when we talk about the title of Jesus being the King of Kings, the capital K, he is the most high king, the most divine king over all kings, right? Not an earthly king, but a divine king. And he says, look, the reason that you are the King of Kings, the reason that you have this power, the reason that you have all this authority, the reason that you have all this splendor and strength and glory is because of who? God. Right? He says, "For the God of heaven has given it to you." This is nothing Nebuchadnezzar did. Nothing. And we even saw that in chapter 1. Verse 38, "Wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold." So, there's no, trying to figure out this interpretation. That the head of this statue is represented by Babylon. It is the largest empire of the time. And the king is Nebuchadnezzar. His kingdom is superior than all the other kingdoms because he has the greatest authority than anyone has ever had. He literally never had to consult with anyone. Whatever he said went. He could do that. He had the power. every other kingdom that's going to come after, and even the ones that we live in now, the empires that are established, the nations, the governments, there is not a man, just one man, who can make all that authoritative decision. There's not. There's no longer monarchs in that sense. It's a democracy. And so again, he says, the God of heaven has given this to you. God has given him the authority over all these things. Verse 39, but after you shall rise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another and a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. So again, the chest and the arms are the next kingdom, which is the Medo-Persian Empire. And then after that is another inferior empire, the bronze, which is, actually I'm getting ahead of myself. The Medo-Persian Empire conquered Babylon in 539 BC under the reign of, anyone know who? Starts with a C. I'm really impressed. Cyrus the Great. Led by Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylon. So the Medo-Persian Empire took over in 539. And this empire, it covered a greater geographical territory, and it lasted longer than Babylon, right? And the two arms, right, because it's in reference to the two arms on the structure, on the statue, is a representation of the two nations of Media and Persia. Isn't it interesting? This is how God, he knows it all. But remember, it's inferior. So yeah, it lasted longer. It was a bigger geographical location, but many think that it was inferior because it wasn't like what Nebuchadnezzar had, in the sense that he had this total tyrannical monarch and the authority and the ability that he had. Nobody could tell him what to do, but when it came to the Medo-Persian Empire, the kings were bound by the laws of the land, unlike Nebuchadnezzar. So that's one of the possibilities. So then we get into the third kingdom, the third least kingdom, which is represented by the bronze. That is the Greek Empire, which would conquer the Medo-Persian Empire in 330 BC under who? This is a famous one, a well-known one. Under the Greek Alexander the Great. So under Alexander the Great, they overtook the Medo-Persian Empire, and this empire was over all the earth, and that it covered more territories than the previous two empires. So verse 40, then the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. So then again, the legs of iron are represented by the Roman Empire, and Rome would conquer the Greeks in 63 BC. And they ruled all the way until 476 AD in the west, and then until around 1453 AD in the east. And Rome's empire actually extended geographically farther than the previous three. Right? And so the two legs represent the east and the west portions of the empire, speaking of Rome and Constantinople. Then Daniel gives more space to this fourth kingdom than the other three, right? He talks about this more than the other three, because this is the kingdom that we live in today. So no human world power follows Rome except for the kingdom of the Messiah, God's kingdom. So we know that the next great kingdom that's going to be established is going to be God's kingdom. But Rome had its influence on what we have now, right? It stamped its image on the Western civilization. So the Western dimension of the Roman Empire reached into France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, and Great Britain, and even then moved into the Americas with us in the United States as well as Canada. And since the fall of the Roman Empire, there's never been a world-dominating empire equal to Rome. Many have tried, but they've never gotten to it, right? Think of, Napoleon. Tried, couldn't. Think of Hitler. Tried, couldn't, right? Think of Stalin. Tried, but he couldn't. They did not succeed. Why? Because God's in control, right? If they were to have succeeded, I'm sure they would have been in this prophecy, but they're not, so they didn't succeed. And what we're going to see, even though that this Roman Empire is kind of fizzled, it's going to, in some form or another, be revived under the leadership of the dictator that's going to arise in the Antichrist, which we're going to see in the future. Verse 41, whereas you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay. So again, you're seeing the material changing here, and Daniel's going to give an extensive explanation of this fourth kingdom like we've just pointed out. So to this point, where we read, Daniel's prophecy has been fulfilled historically. It's happened. It's done. You cannot debate it. But now we're moving into unfulfilled prophecy, right? What's happening after 2024. And the events that are going to happen to the feet of iron and clay are going to occur at Jesus' second coming after the tribulation. After the tribulation is how we are seeing this played out throughout Scripture. Verse 42. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. And as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. So you've got ceramic clay and you've got iron. They don't work well together. They don't stick well together. So what we see is that weakness is now being introduced into this kingdom so that this empire does not last as a world order, because that is what we're leading to, is a one world order. A one world order. And so this prophecy is going to pass over this present age. It's going to go into this, what we call this revived Roman Empire found in the tribulation period. The 10 toes of this statue are related to the 10-nation confederacy of the Roman Empire in the tribulation. Right? There's going to be this final formation of this Roman Empire. The United States is not a part of it. Canada, not a part of it. Any of these Western powers that we see, not a part of it. We and all others will be subservient to this 10-nation confederacy. It's going to happen, it has not happened. And he says, in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke into pieces, the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, its interpretation is sure. Daniel's like, I'm not wrong. He's not like boasting about it, but he's like, God's not wrong. This is certain, and this is sure. It will come to pass. And so he talks about these, he says the great God has made known to the, verse 44, and in the days of these kings is a reference to the 10 kings, the 10-nation confederacy that we're going to see in Europe in the last days. And the book of Revelation actually even refers to this when he talks about the Antichrist's kingdom described as having 7 heads and 10 horns. Right? It's a reference of this 10-nation confederacy. And it's this kingdom that the Antichrist is going to establish in the future that Jesus is going to destroy. Right? The stone cut out without hands. Jesus is going to come back and he's going to set up his earthly kingdom. And so this is the introduction of God's kingdom here. It's going to happen. We've seen, how can we not believe this isn't going to happen when everything else has already happened and transpired? God has proven himself faithful. He's proven himself sure. So God says, look, I'm going to establish this. It's going to be my kingdom. It's going to be a monarchy. Right? Do you guys know what a monarchy is? Do you know what the monarch is, what he represents? It's a king, right? A king that has a kingdom. A monarchy is a kingdom. And so Jesus' kingdom is not going to be a democracy, it's going to be a monarchy. And it's going to be perfect because it's going to be a righteous monarch. An earthly monarch is not righteous. We're full of sin. We mess up, we stumble, but Jesus does not. And he's going to establish this monarchy that if we see him as our king, if we believe he's king, we put our faith in him, we'll be part of that kingdom. So again, the stone cut out without hands is representation of Jesus, who's going to come back and establish this 5th and final kingdom that is unlike any earthly kingdom. Right? It's going to destroy all these Gentile kingdoms, that there's not even going to be a remnant. The things that you can go see in Europe, it's no longer going to be a remnant of it, because now this is the finality of it all. Jesus quoted in Psalm 118 when he warns the Jewish leaders about rejecting him, and rejecting him, their promised Messiah. In Matthew 21, verses 42 through 44, he says, "Have you never read the Scriptures? The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone." He says, "This was the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you, given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. And whoever falls on this stone will be broken, but whomever it falls upon, it will grind him to powder." When the Word of God is presented, when the gospel is presented, when Jesus is presented to you, it's in a sense you fall upon it and are broken, because it brings a spirit of contrite, like a contrite spirit, a broken spirit, which leads to repentance, which leads to salvation, right? But if in our pride we reject that, he says, you will be crushed. You're not going to fall upon it. It will fall upon you, and it's going to crush you. The same way that it's going to just destroy the kingdoms of this world. And so for us as believers, again, this isn't fear. This isn't like, the end of the world type stuff. This is hope. This is good, right? This assurance that we have a future, that there's more beyond what this world has to offer. And so Daniel is promoted here in verses 46. We'll finish here. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. And the king answered Daniel and said, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, and since you could reveal the secret." Again, he's like, you knew, so it's got to be your God. Is this not evidence? Because this book was not written 200 years ago. This book was written long before this happened. And yet God has proven through the past 2,000 years that it's come to fruition. You don't believe a blind, something that's blind. It's not a blind faith. There's evidence to who God is, right? Found right here in His Word and proven through history. So just like, King Nebuchadnezzar was like, I know it's your God now. Now, we're not saved by evidence, right? But I think it helps our faith. You're saved by grace through faith, and it comes by hearing of the Word of God first and foremost. But for you as a believer, there's an assurance and a hope, knowing that God is in control and that all these things have happened. He knows. There's proof. He says, "Truly your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal the secret." And the king promoted Daniel, gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. And also Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Daniel did not forget his friends when he was promoted. Do you know why I like that? Because how did all of this start to begin with? How did Daniel receive the vision of the dream and the interpretation? What did he do? He gathered his friends and they played pool. They worshipped. They played kickball. They played cards. What did they do? They prayed. They prayed. They did this with Daniel. Daniel's the one who's executing all of this. Sure, God is using him in this. But they were a part of it. You don't do things alone. And Daniel doesn't forget them. And he says, look, promote them too. I don't know what he says to them, but they get promoted too, right? He doesn't use this as pride, but he uses this as he's grateful and thankful to God. And he remembers that who he was in God was more important than any promotion or position that he got. But he also never forgot his friends. So we'll end there tonight. We'll pick it up in chapter 3 next time.